Hi, I'm Lea Louise from Inspired Quilting by Lea Louise. Welcome to my sewing room. I'm excited to have you here today. I want to talk about charm squares. Charm squares are great fun to work with. Today I have a pack from Moda Fabric. It's the Flea Market Fresh pack, and I ordered online. I'm part of the Fat Quarter Shop block of the month kind of thing, so I get fun packages every month. And so this is one of the ones that I received. And what's interesting with working with charm squares is you have 42 squares in your pack, and you can have up to as many as 42 different prints. Sometimes they're doubled, so you'll have 20 to 25 depending on the variety mix. And that can make putting a quilt together, other than just a basic patchwork, a little bit tricky. So I want to show you some ideas that I use when working with charm squares. This in particular is the Easy Rail Fence, and it's perfect with charm squares because it's an easy sew, it's an easy cut, and it goes together quick. So what I want to do is break that down for you, show you how to divide up your fabrics, and use them together with a good cohesive look and not look like a scrappy quilt. Nothing wrong with that, but that's not what we're going with here. So let's get started on the Charm Square Rail Fence, and I'll show you what we need to do. Here are the charm squares laid out. Just taking from the top of the bundle, I laid the lightest ones here, the darkest ones, and then the mediums. On this rail fence that we're doing, it's a very simple rail fence. It's a double. So we're just going to be basing this design on contrast, which is light and dark. Now, these collage pieces I really like just the way they are. I'm going to keep these whole and kind of mix them into the pattern. I think that'll be kind of fun. It changes up the rail fence quite a bit. And, oh, this stamp got in here. So what I'm thinking I'm going to do is mix, this is my lightest, this is my darkest, and these are the mediums. So I'm going to take this green and gold is on the lighter side. These are on the darker side. And what I'm going to do is pair these up. So I'll take one of my lights with one of my darks. Now, a couple things to think about. This is the same pattern as that. We don't want the same pattern even though it's a different color. So we're not going to go with that. We don't want to go with something necessarily like this because there's not enough contrast there. They're too similar. So what I would do is choose, now this has a really dark green background, which I think would be really pretty with this. So I would probably set these two together. Got a good contrast of light and dark, and we're just going to put two together, right sides together, and sew down each side with a 1/4 inch seam. And then we'll come back and cut them apart. So the first thing is lay out your fabrics, set aside any that you're not going to cut, and with the remaining, go ahead and put them in pairs of contrasting light and dark, remembering not to combine duplicate patterns together. So let's go ahead and do that. We'll get these sewn, and I'll show you what the next step will be. Here are all the double sewn blocks here. All my charm squares are sewn side to side. What I did is I sewed one side and went through all my blocks. I just chain stitched, and then I came back and did the same on the second side, cut them apart. It makes it very simple to work with, so that's a quick process. Now we have a pile of blocks sewn together in pairs, and they are each 5 inches square. What we're going to do is cut each one in half, and that's going to give us our 2 rails. But we also are going to have to make one other trim, because remember, we're working with squares. When you take a seam down one side, that's changing the size of your square. But we'll get to that in just a minute. So I line this up so it's on a 5 inch block, makes life easy. Put my nifty little ruler. I love this 2.5 by 8 inch. It's perfect for working with small pieces, especially with charms. With the 2.5, you just line it up on one side and go down the middle. So I'm going to go there, And so this is what one block will look like. And I'm going to create two different piles. So I'm going to separate them because these are going to be duplicates, so I don't want them to fall together in the same place on the quilt. And what we do is we just cut the whole pile into two stacks, and then we're going to come back and double check our squares, make sure everything's good to go, and we'll take a look at how this quilt is going to be laid out. And here are my charm squares, all pressed. They're sewn together, cut apart, and I press them. There's a seam down the middle on each one. And this is going to be our rail fence. Now, the rail fence pattern is generally a square block. We started out with a 5-inch square. When you take two seams, that's a 1/4 inch each. So we're losing a 1/2 inch here, a 1/4 inch and a 1/4 inch. So this is now only going to measure 4.5 by 5 inches. In order for this to work, we need to cut it down to 4.5 by 4.5. So I'm going to line this up, and let's see, I am right on the 4.5. Oh, I did good with my seam allowance. So measure and make sure that you are at the 4.5 line and adjust accordingly. If you take a little bit more on your seams, then your block will be a tad smaller. If you go larger, it's you know, I've learned to take a scant seam, and that means that I take it just narrower than a 1/4 inch, and that tends to equal things out better for me, and I end up with more of a block that I want to work with. So go ahead, and we're just going to trim this little bit off. Again, trim the block, not the piece that you're throwing away. You want to make sure that you end up with a 4.5 by 4.5 block, or whatever size your block is. And here's our sewn block. It measures 5 inches, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 by 1, 2, 3, 4.5. So I need to trim this off by a 1/2. Don't just cut your 1/2 inch off. Make sure you measure the whole block from that line so that you're not taking off too much or too little. You may end up with a miscut block, and that's no fun to work with. So put your block across the 5 inch. We know we're going with 4.5. Line up at the 4.5 line and trim that up. So go ahead and get all your blocks done. Then we need to trim these down to 4.5 as well. These are going to fit into the quilt. They need to be the same size. So I've got my 5 inch laid out here on the grid. I'm going to put it at 4.5 there, and I'm going to put it at 4.5 here. And while I don't do a lot of fussy cutting, I will look at this and think, what do I want to keep? And I like the flower in the nest. So that's what I'm going to try and keep. Now this one has a fun little cook that I like, and I like the label. So I am going to keep, let's see, I'm going to keep this side, and so I'm going to cut it off over here. Do my 1/2 inch so I get a 4.5 block, and I'm going to cut it off here because I still get plenty of that blue block, and I've got my 4.5. So go ahead and trim up all your rail fence blocks that are doubled. Get these all trimmed up to 4.5. Take whatever solids, if you're using any, if you're going to use any uncut blocks, trim them down to 4.5. If you made them all into rail fence, that's fine. It depends on the fabric collection you're using and what works out best for you. So let's go ahead and get these all trimmed. We will get our blocks ready to lay out, and I'll show you how we're going to make a rail fence with these. With all our rail blocks cut and trimmed down to 4.5 inches, we have our pile here, and then we have our pile of the blocks that we're going to leave uncut trimmed down to 4.5. So these all equal each other in size. And what I want to do now is show you how we put a rail fence together. This is a very easy rail fence because it just has the 2 rails. Oftentimes you'll see them with multiple rectangular stacks. And the rail fence pattern itself goes back well over 100 years. And so it sort of just depends on what your preference is, how you like to make it. But I wanted to make something quick and simple. And I want to show you first how we make the rail. So we have light and dark, and you notice that the darks are meeting up and they're going to create a rail pattern. So as I come over here, and what we've got is a 4-patch, and let's say we're not even going to deal with those right now. Let me find something else. These are all very similar. And let's put this one in. So we're going to go this way, and then this guy goes in this direction. So we have our dark rail, and now we're starting a light rail. So let's work over here. So we're going to continue with our dark rail. See how it's falling in place? And then we're going to add another dark one. Let's say we'll put this one right here. These are going to go to light. So this one, we've got light. See how we're following our pattern here? And let's put a dark one right here. So we're going to get the next row in. And let's see. We can use this. Oh, I don't want those 2 together, so let's do it this way. I don't want all that. Well, you know what? This might be a good place just to put one of my solid blocks in. There we go. And look at how that matches. Isn't that fun? Okay, so let me move this over because I want to show you the easy way to assemble these is to make them into a 4-patch. So here's the 4-patch that we create. The dark, or the first rail, is going to go horizontal. Then the next one butts right up next to it, going in the opposite direction. This one butts right up next to it, and it goes down. This is the block, and then this will start your next block, or excuse me, your next rail with the light colors. So we're going to do another 4-patch down here. We've got this 4-patch started. Let's see, we're going to go dark that way, dark and dark, and then I want to put a dark one here. And what do we have here? So we have dark, and we want to put a dark one here, and this one is pretend, so it's not anything. It would be a dark. In this case, remember, the dark goes this way, and we'll put that dark, let's see, goes here, and I'm going to put this one here, and this one here, and then I'm just going to stick one of these in randomly. Okay, so do you see what we have? We have a 4-patch. 1, 2, 3, 4. Each of these has 4 blocks. And as long as you choose your colors so you're not repeating the same colors within one 4-patch, you're going to be pretty good in putting your blocks together. This is a random pattern, and unless you're using specific colors with a rail of a certain pattern or color or design, it's all going to kind of hodgepodge together. But the fact that you have the contrast is going to make it far more appealing than just randomly throwing it all together. So my recommendation is to sew a 4-patch. And then once you create all your 4 patches, you're going to be able to finish your quilt. Now, we have 42 blocks that we're going to be working with. And that doesn't work really well in a 4x4. So you can choose to make your 4 patches. So you're going to have 6 by, what are we going to have? 6 by 7. So 2, 4, 6. So you're going to make 1, 2, 3 times 3. So you're going to make 9 4 patches. And then the last few blocks we're going to trim up at the bottom or the top. We'll get that set up. So go ahead and make your 4 patches. In order to do that, we take, let me just get these out of the way so we can work in the middle. So one other beautiful thing about this pattern is notice how these seams are not lining up. This seam is meeting the middle of that rail. So we don't have to align seams. The only seams we're going to be worried about is in the corner. And with all this going on, it really isn't critical. So the first thing is we're going to put 1 block here, 1 block here, and they're right sides together. We're going to sew a 1/4 inch seam down the side. Let me do that, and then I'll show you how we finish off our 4 patch. Now here are 2 blocks that are sewn together along the side in order to make the first seams of our 4 patch. And in order to create the finished 4 patch, we're going to bring these down. So we have 2 blocks on top, 2 on the bottom, fold it over, and we're going to sew across the seam here. And then when we open it out, we're going to get our 4 patch like this. Now, what I want you to take a look at is this point here. What's nice about the way this pattern goes together is you see how these rails do not line up with each other. They fall in the center of the block, so you don't have to match those seams. But you do have this corner seam. Now this can be pretty busy, so it may not be terribly noticeable, but I still make an effort to nest my seams. Now that's something that you learn in any kind of patchwork quilting. Nesting is when you put them snug together. You can feel with your thumb and finger that these seams are just almost on top of each other. They're really side by side, but they're very close. And the other important part is that the seam allowance goes in opposite directions. Now when I'm sewing, I make every effort that I'm going to come this way, and I'm going to sew on top of the seam allowance that faces the direction I'm coming from. The reason for that is as the press of foot comes through here, it's going to give this guy just a little nudge to push it into that seam just a tad bit closer, and then I'll just finish sewing, being careful to keep that seam lined up the way it's pressed. So what I'm going to do is get all my 4 patches. I need 9 4 patches, and we'll go ahead and put this together, and I'll show you how to finish a quilt. So here are the finished 9 patches, or excuse me, the finished 4 patches. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Now what I did is I chained piece 3 together. So I took 3 like this and a pair from the end. Remember, we're using 9 4 patches plus the extra 6 blocks down here, and that's going to give you a 6 by 7 row quilt. And sewing these together, chain stitch along the way, you get 1 row with 3 4 patches and a double, your next row 3 4 patches and a double, and then we're going to sew these together in the same manner. And then once that's finished, we'll sew the long seams together, and this quilt will be finished. So let me show you that last step, and I'll get that laid out for you. Well, here's our finished quilt with the 4 patch charms and the extra row of charm squares to make it a 6 by 7, and it makes a really sweet little quilt. I'm thinking I want to do a border around this to kind of tie it all together. I happen to have a second set of these charm squares, and I think I'm going to use the stamps because that would make a nice border around the edge to kind of tie it all together, and then I can choose to add another border or not. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. The other thing that I want to point out is the rail fence. If you see how we can follow it along, it's not real visible at this point, only because the quilting needs to be put in place. Once the quilting is done, and I'll do a double line across each rail, it's going to make the quilting stand out that much more. So I will go ahead and work on that. And once that's all finished, I'll show you the finished quilt. But in the meantime, you've got plenty to work with. Go ahead and get a charm pack and get this far on your quilt, and you can choose to stop here, bind it, and you've got a sweet little baby quilt, or make it larger for a lap quilt. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and you're ready to move on with some other charm packs and see what you can come up with. It's been my pleasure to share this with you today. Thank you very much.